What a haunting sound. Suitable especially for that piece of music, in part because it's the gymnopédie, which is the name of the piece, is an imaginary dance. It means a dance done naked in a Greek fashion. And you can imagine it moving very slowly with human bodies being sculptural acts in motion. And when you hear it, you can actually imagine that and not giggle. I like it. Every Sunday when a person stands here, they're torn between the choice of delivering a sermon or a homily. We who go to school learn there's a difference between them. A sermon is when you hold up your finger and you say, whoa, or whatever, and you're trying to get people to do things or to stop doing things. A sermon is always to the world, whether it's people in front of you or out there beyond the world. A sermon is proclaiming, this is the truth, behold. A homily is between friends. It's for those who have already heard the word and want to get better at it. Now, the problem is that on a given Sunday, some of the people in the house are going to be one of each. Most of you want and need a homily. Some of you are here for a sermon. And I don't know which one is going to work best. I just don't. And that's why we have to work it out every Sunday. Which one will it be? Will it be words of comfort and uplift, or will it be words of challenge and provocation? And at its best, both happen. But not because of me, because of you. So I ask you to dispose yourselves toward the creation of what it is you need, a homily or a sermon or some of both, and to remember there is humility in the act of asking and receiving, which is why I always start with that phrase out of the Hebrew Scriptures, may these words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be found true in thy sight, thou who art my rock and my Redeemer. All this month, Matthew and I have been talking about shelters. We started the year talking about shelters, physical shelters, because we were working with the homeless, those who were in need of better housing from the folks at Habitat or the like. But we're talking about communities that shelter us, because even if you have a place to live, you need people around you to hold you up. In the beginning of the month, Matthew lifted up the workers that we live with. How many of us have day jobs and these become part of our lives, and every now and then we turn to them to help us get through the day and perhaps the weeks. On Mother's Day, we remembered family and how the generations are caught up with one another and have to work out how they care for each other. As Carl Sandburg said, hope is the place where when you knock, they have to let you in. But that doesn't mean they're going to give you more than a moment's notice once you're there. On the 15th, we talked about our communities, like the nation, and laws and rules, and how we need those structures in order to be our very best. And this week, I want to talk about friendship. Part of what a congregation is about is friendship, knowing the people, not just being part of the institution, but knowing the people you share it with. Do you come to church regularly? If you are a member here, you end up sitting in mostly the same place, don't you? And so you get used to seeing the same faces. They become your kind of worship buds, your claque of gatherers, and you look forward to sitting next to them and putting the right elbow toward them. I see the smiles right now. This is your spot. I know it's your spot. You know it's your spot because when you come to church and someone's visiting and sitting in your spot, you suddenly don't feel like you're quite where you want to be. That's my spot. So the friendship thing is powerful inside the church, but it's not just the church. We have friends. I hope we have friends beyond it, that they spill out. But I want to talk about the friendship we have inside of a congregation, because even though we can be a little clannish at times, we know at our best that our circles of friendship really do have holes through which people can go, enter, and become part of them. One of the circles that's opened up in the past few years is the parent circle, as young mothers, all of them in this case, have found each other and created a friendship network within our midst. But what I want to talk about here is what friendship is and how we express it. Because if you feel it but don't share it, how much of a friend are you? As Ralph Waldo Emerson said so famously years ago, the best way to have a friend is to be one. So what does it mean to be a friend? And I don't mean friend in the sense of friendly or amusing or charming, but a true friend. The kind of friendship that comes, well, is the species of love. I say that because in the Gospel of John, we have a famous, so famous that it's a cliche phrase that makes us ponder what's going on. In it, Jesus is supposed to have said, "Greater love hath no man than this, than to lay down his life for his friend." You'll notice he didn't say his family, or his God, or his spouse. You notice he used the word his all the way through, too. It can have an exclusive sound. But we hear about giving up one's life for one's country or being willing to die for one's children, but for a friend, what is going on here? And is friendship really that kind of love? Makes me wonder a little bit. Well, where I want to start with as I ponder this is that I believe we learn to feel that kind of love, that kind of devotion, by doing it before we actually feel it. You know, in Hamlet gets angry with his mother for having married her brother-in-law so quickly and accuses her of being a harlot and implores her to do better. And he uses the phrase, "Assume a virtue if you have it not." What he meant is, take on a good habit, even if you don't feel good at it. How many people of you out there have tried to put on a good habit like exercise or moderating your food intake or being more generous, whatever it is? Was your heart in it at the beginning? Not so much. But you were told you should do these things. Well, one of the things that psychology is teaching all of us, and what all parents know by example, is that we become friends, we learn to love by doing it, and our hearts then follow it. The best example I have is a personal one, and it's a very poignant one, so forgive me if I get a little clenched as I get to the end. Many years ago, when our oldest, who is now 27, was, let me think now, about 3, almost 4, so most of a quarter of a century, so which means he's talking, but his grasp of logic and abstract concepts is minimal, correct? And we all had our rituals. Didn't you have rituals when you were growing up? And your parents, especially at night, you would brush your teeth and put on your pajamas and you read a book and you get into bed. And we had all of that with our son too. And every night you put your son into bed, as so did we. And he was still living in the crib at this point, although the rail was low. But I had to help him in. If you're a parent, you remember exactly what it felt like, don't you? Your arms still remember, don't they? And you help the young man into the crib, and what do? You always kiss them and you say, "I love you, good night." Did that for weeks and weeks, most of his life, in fact. And then one night, as I'm backing out of the room and saying, "Good night, son, I love you," he said, "I love you." I couldn't stand up at that point. He didn't know what he was saying, though. But it meant that he understood something powerful and important and real was being said, and it was important to give it back. The words were the way he returned the feeling. He didn't have the feeling, but he gave the words back. And over time, the feeling came to rest inside the words, inside the actions. And I'm telling you this is important, that friendship and love starts not in our hearts and comes out of us in our hands. It starts in our hands and comes back to us into our hearts. We learn to love. We learn to be friends by doing it, and doing it really badly for a while. Remember how hard it was to have friends as a child, and how you had best friends and then they weren't your best friend the next week and then they were again. We try on love. We try on friendship. We do it over and over, and we do it badly until we get better and better at it. And slowly we come to understand that the feeling of being close to someone is the result of actually working with, talking to, doing for, and being done for. We assume a virtue and become what we do. The best part about this is that the more friendship you try out, the more you get. I like to think of love and friendship as being renewable resources. There's not a well from which we draw that it will grow empty unless we put it back in. So I'm here to remind you that what friendship and love is a doing, not a feeling. It's an action more than a sense, a state of being. And what we need to do in order to sustain its sheltering power, to grow its presence in our lives, is to do more of it, even on days when we're not especially fond of that person.